This might just be the most flexible kind of intermittent fasting that you could even imagine. It's called the 5-2 approach. And there is a lot of merit behind it and a lot of interesting studies that back up the sustainability, which is probably the most, it is the most important factor, because when it comes down to revamping your lifestyle, what you want is sustainability. So what is the 5-2 approach? Okay, the 5-2 approach in essence is where you go 5 days out of the week with your normal diet, relatively normal diet. And then 2 days out of the week, you restrict calories down to 25% of your normal caloric intake. Now that does not mean that you need to literally fast those days. It means that you need to restrict calories down to 25%. So in essence, if you were doing, let's say you ate 2,000 calories per day normally. It's probably more than that, but just for simple math. 25% of that would be 500 calories. So 2 days out of the week, you would restrict calories down to 500. Okay, if you ask me, that is something sustainable. If you tell me to just go out and just eat ad libitum, somewhat normal, through the course of the week, and then 2 days out of the week, count calories and get aggressive with it, I could do that for a very long time. Now, you can do this 2 different ways. You can take your 2 days that you restrict calories and you could literally fast those days and do sort of a 1 meal a day approach. That would absolutely work. Or you could just eat like a bird throughout the course of the day, and that would work too. I think the prior is probably a little bit easier, but anyhow, let's get into the science, because this isn't just something that Thomas made up. This is a legit thing that has a lot of merit behind it. There was a study that was published in the International Journal of Obesity, okay, and it took a look at a 5-2 approach versus standard caloric restriction. So with the 5-2 approach, they had them eat on 2 days per week, they had them eat 25% of their normal calories. In this case, it came down to 647 calories to be exact, 2 days per week. The rest of the week, they ate their relative normal diet. No restrictions in the foods they could eat. It was just eat whatever you want. Just here's your calorie numbers. Here's your deficit day numbers. They compared that to a standard energy restriction, caloric restriction group at 1,500 calories per day. Okay, and they monitored this for 6 months. The results were pretty cool. Both groups lost about the same amount of weight. Now, if you get down to the granular, the 5-2 group lost slightly more. The 5-2 group lost 6.4 kilograms over 6 months, and the caloric restriction group, they lost 5.9. So a decent difference, but again, they weren't looking at muscle mass, they were only looking at total weight, so there's a lot of potential holes you could poke there. Bottom line is about the same amount of weight loss. Okay, but they both had great improvements in biomarkers. Improvements in leptin, reduced leptin levels, so less levels of like leptin resistance. Okay, they had blood pressure improvements, both systolic and diastolic. C-reactive protein levels had improved. LDL levels decreased, triglyceride levels decreased, sex hormone binding globulin levels increased, which in this particular case was good. They also had an increase in IGF binding, okay, which is great for overall muscle growth. And then they had improvements in, of course, fasting glucose and fasting insulin. Okay, this is cool. Both groups had similar results there. But what they found is that the group that did 5-2 said that it was more sustainable and something that they could probably do for a long time. That is what's very important. Now, on the 2 days that they were eating less, if they were actually fasting those days, not just reducing calories, I would make the argument that they would probably have improvements in their insulin resistance above and beyond the other groups. Simply because caloric restriction isn't necessarily going to improve insulin resistance. Abstaining from food for periods of time is what gives those pancreatic beta cells enough of a break to sort of recharge that insulin sensitivity. Now, I've got some more science that I'm going to drop on you here. One of the most important things, regardless, if you are doing a 5-2 approach on your regular eating days and your fasting days, prioritize protein. Do not waste muscle. Prioritize protein. Okay, now there was another study published in Frontiers in Cardiovascular Medicine. It was another 6-month study. This study took a look at 205 individuals, so a little bit bigger. And in this particular case, they were either obese or obese and hypertensive. Okay, so they were looking at people with a little bit more metabolic issues in this case. The 2 strategies that they had them do. One group did a 5-2 approach, okay, where they ate, somewhat standard, and then 2 days a week. The women restricted to 500 calories, the men restricted to 600. The other group did, again, standard caloric restriction, where the men restricted to 1,200, the women restricted to 1,000. Wow, if you ask me, I wouldn't want to do that. I don't want to count to 1,200 calories every day just to lose weight. That sounds miserable, but that's just me. The results of the 5-2 group, there was a 7 kilogram weight loss over the 6-month period. Okay, and there was a 6.8 kilogram weight loss in the caloric restriction group. Okay, so very similar amounts again, like very little difference there. Okay, very similar improvements in their systolic and diastolic blood pressure as well. So we saw tremendous improvement there. Just another testament to how effective this strategy is. Another thing they looked at is their HbA1c, or their hemoglobin A1c. What this looks at is the level of sugar that had been in their bloodstream over a lagging period of time, usually about 90 days. Okay, so it's hard to get a solid figure on this, but one thing that I could attest to is that, again, if you're going to see an improvement in your HbA1c, it generally comes through some periods of like abstaining from food once again. Caloric restriction will trigger an improvement, but I would argue that if someone was doing 5-2 and on the 2 days per week was actually fasting for 16, 18, 20 hours, they might see an even stronger improvement in HbA1c. Okay, now let's get to the really interesting thing that took a look at a large group of people over a year and really truly awesome observational stuff that tells us so much about this 5-2 approach. This study was published in 2021 in PLOS One. Took a look at 300 people, divided them into 3 groups, okay? One group was a standard diet that just kind of gave them directions on how to restrict calories and how to do it. Another group was 5-2 approach with the same kind of thing. They gave them pamphlets and explained how to do it. The last group was 5-2, but with some additional support. Okay, they wanted to see different factors here. Okay, so they monitored them over the course of a year, and what they found at the end of the study was really cool. Okay, they found that in the standard group, 15% of the people lost 5% or more of their body weight. That's still pretty awesome, right? In the 5-2 group, 18% lost 5% or more of their body weight. Okay, so a slight improvement there. In the 5-2 group that also had community support and a little help in the form of like just one-on-one support as well, well, that had 28% of the group ended up having 5% or more of their body weight. So we see that 5-2 is slightly better, but with any diet, having support is going to help you a ton. Well, that's not the end of the deal, right? Okay, we see 5-2 is slightly better. A few more people lost weight, but what was the most important was that the 5-2 ended up having the highest experience rating. People that did the 5-2 said, I didn't feel like I was dieting. I could continue doing this. This was a great experience, and I could still enjoy the foods that I liked. So I think that, in fact, I know that counts for something. That's how I operate. The last thing I want to talk about is one that's related to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This was published in 2021 as well in JHEP Reports. This is pretty interesting because they took a look at 74 people, okay, 74 people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and they gave them 12 weeks of treatment, and they did a few different things. They had them either do low carb, high fat, a 5-2 approach with eating whatever kinds of foods they want, or what is called a standard of care, like the standard diet advice that they would get if someone said, hey, you have fatty liver, this is the standard of care dietary advice. Results were really cool. The low carb, high fat group and the 5-2 group were both superior at reducing steatosis, reducing the amount of actual fatty liver. But it gets a little bit deeper than that. The low carb, high fat group ended up losing a little bit more than the 5-2 group. There was like a 7% or 7.2% reduction in steatosis. The 5-2 group was a 6.1% reduction in steatosis over 12 weeks, and the standard of care was like 3.6%. So regardless, the standard of care is not necessarily the way to go. And when you look at this, again, we got to look at all the data, but based on this study, when you look at the 5-2 approach, you'd say, okay, it looks like low carb, high fat might be better. But when you actually look at liver stiffness, you see that liver stiffness improved in the 5-2 group, but not in the low carb group. That's not to say that 5-2 is better than low carb. What it is saying is, okay, if you have fatty liver, maybe it's better to do 5-2 because you can still enjoy food a little bit more. You still get quite an improvement in steatosis. You still get this huge improvement in liver flexibility or liver stiffness, but you get to eat more flexibly. That is so important. In fact, in this study, the subjects that did the 5-2 said that this was exceptionally well tolerated and something that they could continue to do for a long period of time. The nice thing about 5-2 is there's not a ton of rules. Okay, it's realistic and it's lifestyle oriented. Okay, if you typically right now eat 2,500 or 3,000 calories per day, continue to do that at whatever means you want for 5 days out of the week. Then on the weekends, the weekend diet, then you go ahead and you say, okay, during the weekend, I'm going to restrict my calories to 25% of what I normally eat during the week. Watch it happen. It is awesome, sustainable, realistic, and fun. I'll see you tomorrow.